I would venture to guess that Latin America is maybe an extreme example and happened fairly recently, but I'd say that it's not the only example. I'd say you see the same thing, for instance, in India, one of the most ancient caste systems, of course, in the world. Now substantially dismantled, thank heavens, but still in force up to not so long ago. Within the past century, it was very much in force. Anyway, and where did the Indian caste system come from? Well, it came from Indo-European invaders, not heading west out to Europe and such, where they became Germans and French and all that, or the ancient Romans, but rather heading east and south into the Indian subcontinent, armed with superior weapons as well as mastery of horseback riding and facial hair. And anyway, they subjugated the indigenous peoples of the Indian subcontinent, established a caste system, an ethnic, racial caste system, later reinforced by philosophy and religion, with, of course, themselves on the top. And who were they? They were the people with greater ability to grow facial hair. And so again, there's another way of kind of showing your relatedness to the ruling ethnic caste by growing facial hair. And I think some of the same story you'd probably find as well in parts of Africa, for instance, where Semitic peoples, Arab people, or other Semitic peoples went down into Africa, the eastern part of Africa, and in some cases established themselves as certainly a trader class or caste, and certainly with more money, in some cases probably sort of taking a greater level of political power, intermarrying, intermixing. And of course Semitic peoples also grow lots of facial hair, just like Northern Europeans, Russians, etc. And that probably became a status symbol in parts of Africa as well. Elsewhere in the world, of course, beards had other cultural meaning. I mean, a more benign cultural meaning. I mean, not necessarily linked to kind of ethnic oppression, as in Latin America or India. In China, for instance, beards were a status symbol throughout the years of the old Chinese Empire. I mean, before the Nationalist Revolution in 1911, and certainly before the Second World War and such. Anyway, yeah, beards were a status symbol in ancient China up through early modern times. The reason being, in that case, well, who knows, maybe there was some sort of connection with the, the Mongol invaders who established themselves on the top of Chinese society at a certain point. Maybe, who knows, maybe they were intermixed with Russians. Maybe they grew more facial hair than most of the people of East Asia, who grow facial hair but slowly. But anyway, the main reason, as far as anyone knows, is just Confucianism and the traditional reverence for age and the wisdom that's supposed to come with it. But anyway, that was one of the defining features of ancient and traditional Chinese society and other societies of East Asia. And so a man with a beard, a substantial beard, where it took a man a long time to grow a beard, was older and wiser, and to be respected as such. I remember when I was a graduate student in history, unfortunately, I never had the chance to study Chinese history as a course. It's really interesting. But I did do a fair amount of research for a professor who was a specialist of Chinese history, including research into social and cultural history of China in the 1800s. And I remember reading a passage from a book written by an English observer who had traveled to China and observed traditional Chinese culture. And an interesting book, actually, because a lot of books from the Victorian era, from the 1800s, tend to just look down on, well, pretty much any culture or society that wasn't Victorian England or Northern Europe of the same period. Or the United States or Canada, they could probably handle those too. But, they had a tendency to look down on everything else. And this book actually didn't. It was pretty sympathetic to and respectful of, traditional Chinese culture. This particular British man wasn't just going in and saying, oh yeah, we're everything, they're nothing. No. And, it was sort of ironic. The writer pointed out, this was probably sometime between 1860 and 1880 the book was published. He pointed out how the Chinese really didn't like or respect that much the red-haired barbarians coming in from Europe, coming in with more advanced, sophisticated technology, military and otherwise, and pushing around the Chinese, who were, well, a proud, ancient, powerful empire with China's always had a high opinion of itself, the celestial empire, the center of the whole universe. China used to view itself as. Maybe it does again now, and maybe it can afford to. But anyway, these proud people did not like being pushed around by a bunch of kind of coarse, aggressive, ill-mannered Northwestern Europeans. And so this British writer, kind of sympathetically to the Chinese, was pointing that out, that there isn't much about Europeans that the Chinese really respect, but, the book went on, they really envy those European beards. It's like, wow. Think of having beards like that. And of course this was, well, a lot of the contact between Europe and China, when Europe was sort of tightening its hold on East Asia, was in especially the second half of the 1800s. And that's a time, as you may remember, if you remember old pictures and books from history, that was a time when pretty much every Northern European male, including in America and Canada, had a beard. And even if the Chinese may not have been impressed by anything else, but they were impressed by those beards. So anyway, there's some more cultural significance to beards. I think probably you'd find some of the same in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, certainly, where the beards grow relatively slowly, and so a substantial beard would tend to be on, for instance, a tribal elder, a wise and respected older member of the community. Again, in a traditional society that respects age, unlike our society.